Welcome back to the second part of Windows Football Manager Become Spreadsheet Manager. We're starting here on the Attribute Analysis tab just to show you a couple minor changes that I've made. Up top here in the green with the white numbers, we have the differences between the two. It's just an easy example to see where they've fallen and where they haven't. And then down here on the bottom, thanks to a suggestion from Ponzi on the FM Slack channel in the training forum, I've added in this here. This is a comparison of a player as he's improved or hasn't improved as the years have gone on. As you see, I have Jean-Marc Parent here starting in June of 18 all the way up to October 21st. And the cool thing about this formula is it takes the number in each column and compares it to the number above it. And if it's higher than the number above it, it turns it green. If it's the same, it stays gray. And then let me show you here real quick. I went back and created a player on a couple of the tabs. I just called him test player. So, and I be honest with you, I can't remember what tabs I put him on. So if I just copy and paste him here, as you see, when the number is less than the number above it, it turns red. So this gives you an idea of where he's fallen off and why. I think this is a really good training tool in that, you know, if you see his technicals falling, maybe it tells you need to train on him on his technicals more. If you see his physicals falling, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's age, maybe it's training, maybe it's injury. But this is a good example of some more stuff you can do. The formula for this is actually really interesting, and I don't think I can explain it completely. So let me show you that here. And it is going to be this right here. Sorry, minor interruption there. My dog decided he wanted to eat and drink. I think he does that when I start recording. It happens more often than not, and frankly, it's an overpowering sound. So here we are. This is the formula used to determine what's going on down here. Indirect address row column greater than indirect address row minus 1. And if that's the case, you turn it green. I'm not quite sure why it's minus 1 and not plus 1. Same with 0 and so on and so forth. I think it has something to do with these commands, which frankly are not commands I use all that often. I got this off a post on Stack Exchange, and it worked out really well for me. So as you can see, the array doesn't start at the top row. It has to start at the second row. But the nice thing about it is, if for whatever reason you want to add a row in between here, you can do that, and the array will automatically adjust to cover it. And that's the changes to the analysis stuff. Today, we're going to talk about wages and wage distribution. Now, it's not something that a lot of players of Football Manager keep track of. I think for the most part, if you're under your wage budget, you're happy. And if you're over your wage budget, you're panicking because you're trying to figure out who you can sell to get under your wage budget, especially if you're really, really over and your club is in financial difficulties. This is more just a tool for me to make sure I'm not overspending on players in certain areas. And it can also help you with some squad dynamic stuff as well. Now, the thing about this is there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on. That is because of how these particular screens are exported from Football Manager. Now, I haven't done it for this season that just started. It's actually one of the things I'm going to do tomorrow. But this is an example of the view I set up. And then you copy and paste it into Excel. Well, the issue is Excel and or Calc doesn't read the salary this way. So you have to go in. I mean, I ended up deleting all these columns. Then you have to go in and with some behind the scenes work, get it to where you can do this. And then you see you have the categories. I always put in when their contract ends. I also add their value. Now I've got a column here that's essentially a count. And what this is counting all the players over here that have key player contracts. And then it takes that, figures out how much they're earning per week off their salary, and fills that in here. Same thing for first teamers, players on rotation, players on backup, hot prospects, youngsters, guys who are not needed, and players who are out on loan. Then I also have that count over here. So, you know, nine key players, 7 first teamers, 3 backups, 17 hot prospects, 18 youngsters, 2 not needed, and 5 on loan for a total of 61. This is also just a double check here to sum up these guys. And then if I scroll down here, You'll also see I have 61. That's just, it's essentially me double checking myself, making sure I'm not missing anything. And then over here as well, the total value of the players I have. Now, how does this feed back into wage distribution? Like so. As an example, my wage budget is 39,005 euros. My assumption, and this is purely an assumption, is that my projected wage budget for players is my wage budget times 75%, assuming my non-player salaries, my coaches, my director of football, my general manager, my physios, everything like that, take up 25% of my available wage budget. That leaves my current player wages at 29,300 euros. What I have up here then, you'll see key players, first team players, squad rotation, backup, and youth. And youth includes hot prospects and youth contracts. Backups includes backups and not neededs. I have a count, which comes directly over from the players tab. This column here is how many I think I should have, and this changes with time. Assuming you have a 22-person senior roster, 11 starters, 11 backups, how many of those players should be key players? How many of those players should be first teamers? How many of those players should be squad rotation? That's not set in stone. It's whatever you as a manager think you should have. Although I will say, experiences show me the more key players you have, especially in the same positions, the more headaches you're going to have as they start complaining about playing time. I would think you probably want 3 or 4 key players. You want 5 or 6 first teamers. You want a bunch of squad rotation guys, a decent amount of backups, and then everything else is your youth. As I have it set up now, 20% of my wage budget should be towards key players, 40% towards first team players, 20% towards squad rotation guys, 10% on backup players, and 10% on youth players. Taking that into account, this number here is how much I should be spending on my current wage budget for players in that category. But as you can see over here, I think I should be spending 5,800 euros on key players. I'm spending 13,200. I'm spending 7,000 more above and beyond. Key players, or first team players rather, I think I should be spending 11,000 euros or 11,700 euros. I'm only spending 9,400. That gives me a plus 2,300 euros cushion to spend on first teamers. Squad rotation guys, I don't have any, and that's on me. I don't sign a lot of rotation contracts. It's something I need to pay more attention to. So as a result, I have 5,800 euros that I'm not spending on squad rotation guys. Now, as it so happens, this 5,800 euros and the 2,300 euros is about the same as what I'm overpaying on my key players. My backups, I'm spending a little bit less on. My youth, I'm spending more on because I have a lot of youth prospects and youngsters on decent contracts, 300, 350 euros a week, because I want to keep them. So, of that, I am currently 46 euros. Well, at the time, I was 46 euros over my wage cap. I'm still trying to figure this out. I've got this backwards somehow. I want this to reflect how much I'm actually spending on my wage budget. So, ideally, this would say I'm spending 116% of my total wage budget. Now, the other thing we're going to look at today, and this here takes up the most amount of time getting done. And I don't know how useful it would be to the, well, I don't want to say average player, but to the player who's not really going in depth. And that is the schedule. This is my first season in League 2, the 2021-2022 season. Now, what you see over here on the right, these are all the teams in League 2. And this is where they were at the beginning of the season and how they got there. So the top 3 teams were relegated from League 1. You have your middle teams, and then you have your teams promoted from the National League. This here is what the pundits think they're going to finish. At the end of the season, when I got done filling everything in, and I usually fill this out every 3 or 4 weeks or so, this is where they actually finished. I also keep track of points home and points away, and I total those up here. But as you can see over here, this is the schedule. And this took a decent amount of time to figure out how to do. At one point in time, I wanted to include all games like the Coup de League games and the Coup de France games, but doing that in order to, and trying to keep the running points total going here was just not working. It was more headaches than I care to remember. And so I took those out. I don't keep track of those. Now, The schedule here, as it's listed, may not always be the schedule you eventually have because games get moved for a variety of reasons. You just have to remember to go back in and fix them. So, what I actually have going on here, and I think this is really kind of cool. Historically speaking, the past 10 years or so in League 2, you needed 43 points or more to avoid relegation in League 2. I want to do better than that, so I want to go 1 point more, 44 points. There's 38 games in League 2. Take 44 rather, and you divide it by 38, you get 1.16 points. That is how many points you need a week in order to avoid relegation. Probably 9 times out of 10 how many points you need a week to avoid relegation. Now, I got just a couple lookups set over here where, as an example, if this is a loss, that changes to a 0. And you'll see 0 is less than the 1.16, so that turns red. As this season goes on, if, for example, I lose this game here, you'll notice if it's less than the points total I need, it's going to be red. So as you get later on in the season and you start seeing yourself a little bit more in the red, you know you got to kick it up. How is that possible? Well, you got to look at your strength of schedule. Let me undo these here real quick. So that's back. I think the top 3 teams in the league, and for the most part, I tend to agree with the pundits. It's my dog out back, probably chasing a squirrel. Anyhow, I tend to agree with the pundits because, frankly, I just don't do a lot of in-depth scouting on the teams and their players. So I usually don't deviate from this. The pundits think the top 3 teams that are all relegated from League 1 are going to be the 3 toughest. I give them a red. The next 14 teams, I split them in half. The top half are going to be a little bit harder. The bottom half, not so hard. The bottom 3 teams that we came up with, we should beat them no problem. That's what I think, more often than not. So I've got it set up over here by a strength of schedule. So if I think Claremont is going to be a fairly, and the way that works out is greens are 0, yellows are 1, blues are 2, reds are 3. So if for whatever reason I think Claremont is going to be a really, really tough opponent, I change that to 3. You'll notice Claremont changes to red. And then what I do is I break the season up into quarters. Now, because of the 38 games, you can't have even quarters. So I have 2 10s and 2 9s. And so if I highlight these rows here for the first quarter, you can see I've got 4 yellows, 1 green, 3 blues, and 2 reds. If I total up what I think their strength of schedule is, that's 16 points. That to me is pretty tough. I actually scored 19 this season because I was really good away, especially against the first place teams. And I do that for every quarter. And this tells me what I have coming up in terms of strength of schedule. Now, I don't adjust this as the season goes on. This is preseason after the summer transfer window has closed, guesstimates, for lack of a better word. But as you can see here, like in the third quarter, for example, I played all 3 top teams. I also played 3 of the better teams at the top of the league. And then I played 2 teams at the bottom of the league, and then AS Béziers, who came up at the same time we did. But this was going to be a tough run of games for us. And as you can see here, it was a tough run of games for us. We lost a couple games. We drew a lot of games. And that way you can track how well you're doing against your opponents. Now, one of the things I do is I have a column here for actual finishes. So if I sort this by ascending, you can see how well the pundits guessed and how wrong they were. And for the most part, they were pretty right. A lot of your red teams and most of your blue teams finished top half. A lot of your yellow teams and all your green teams finished bottom half. The one aberration was us. We were picked to finish 20th. We finished 9th. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm a human player. I can make more adjustments, maybe not better adjustments, but more adjustments in training and things like that to counter my opponents. The other thing I've got going on here is I look at my home and away points. As you can see, we had 34 points at home, 23 points away. We ended the season on 57 points, so I got just a couple checks here for that sort of thing. But if you'll notice, like against Rhymes, we beat them home and away. We beat Troyes at home, but we lost away. We drew with Strasbourg at home, and we won away. We were actually, we were stronger at home than we were away, but we got 15 points against the top 3 teams in the league. That's really, really good. Where did we fall down? Well, primarily against teams like Sochaux. They absolutely thumped us. We also didn't have the best result against Nimes. Valenciennes held us to draws in both matches, even though they weren't the best team at the time. So it's just it's a tool more than anything else. I mean, I'm sure there's more ways you could go in depth to this and try and figure it out. But especially if you've got a lot of games coming up, and as an example, say you have a Coup de France game coming up against an opponent that you're not sure of. Do you want to play a fully rotated side against them? Well, who are you playing 3 days after that Coup de France game? If you're playing a team like AS Béziers, who's a weak team, then yeah, you can play the majority of your first teamers in that Coup de France game, because you can be reasonably sure that the first teamers you don't play and the reserves, who should be almost as good as your first teamers, should be able to handle a team like Béziers, because they're not as good as you. If after your Coup de France game you were playing, say, Strasbourg or Auxerre, that's more of a judgment call. Do you go half and half? Do you play a fully rotated side in the Coup de France game and take your chances? When you start getting into European games with Europa League and things like that, that's when it's going to really come into play. I'd like to be able to think I'm going to figure out a way to include those games in this. I think what I may have to do is set up separate columns down, or set up a separate table down here for those games and number them in. As you see, I've got the weekly matches here. So when I was sorting these by home and away results to see how we did and things like that, I can give those numbers and slot them in, and then it's a matter of figuring out how not to screw up the running points total. One of the things you're not seeing, you'll notice this starts at 37 here. That's because I have the season above hidden. And for whatever reason, the first couple of times I was fooling around with the conditional formatting on this sort of stuff, and the conditional formatting was related to the team and their strength of schedule and so on and so forth. I screwed something up. I put in the conditional format and everything went blank. So it has to probably be a hierarchy thing. I don't know that I have to make a tab for every schedule. If I did, that'd be a real pain in the ass. Pardon my French. But as you can see down here, this is the season I've got coming up. These are the teams that are in, and this is just last season's schedule copied down. I haven't copied and pasted the new schedule in. This is going to be my experimental season, where if I can see if I can't insert the Coup de Ligue and Coup de France games and have it not screw up this stuff here. The other thing that comes in handy is the days between matches. Now, this will always change. Well, let me rephrase that. This is not set in stone, because you are going to have those Coup de Ligue and Coup de France games, or those European games if you're at that level, throwing that off. And that's one of the reasons I want to add those in here, if only because it will make this much better. Now, the way this works is it's looking at the date. It's looking at the dates and subtracting them, and then that's how many days you have in between. So, if you have 4 games in between this game and this game, you may have to rest some players or take your chances with some of your reserves. Or you have something like this, 28 days. Hey, that's an international break. Maybe you can play your reserves against these guys, or maybe you are going to be playing your reserves against these guys because all your first teamers are away playing for their country. At one point in time, I had a color code set up to where if this was less than 4 days, if this was less than or equal to 4 days, make it red. If it was greater than or equal to 8 days, make it green. But I took that off of this because I don't want to do that until I can figure out how to get the European games in there. And honestly, if anybody has an idea of how to do that, inserting the games in without screwing up the running points total, that'd be great. So, that's the schedule. And that's pretty much all I have now at the moment. I've seen some other things online that players have done. I'm totally blanking on his name now. Hold on a second. FM Athlete, who is over on the Slack forums as well, has put together a spreadsheet for training. And thank God he did, because Lord knows if I tried doing it, I would still be doing it until the heat death of the universe. But it's got the training schedule with the drop-down boxes. You choose what you want to do for training. It highlights what attributes it's going to be training. He should have a post on that coming out fairly soon on his own blog. Once he does that, I will post a link to it on mine and shout it out as loud and as hard as I can from my tweets as well, because it's really good work, and it's something I'm going to incorporate into this spreadsheet once I have permission. So that's going to wrap it up for this part of when does Football Manager become Spreadsheet Manager. If you have some things you'd like to see added, or some changes you'd like to see made, or some other things you would like to see explained, please leave a comment down below. Any other comments, questions, criticisms, leave those down below as well. My name's FM19, and I thank you very much for watching.